At 7:32 in the morning on February 10, 1942, Lieutenant Commander John Thach watched 6 Japanese Zeros diving toward his 4 Wildcats over Wake Island, knowing his pilots had maybe 90 seconds before they died. He was 37 years old with 214 flight hours in Wildcats and 0 kills against Zeros. The Japanese had sent 18 Mitsubishi A6M Zero fighters to sweep American patrols from the morning sky. Thach's Wildcat was slower. The Zero climbed faster, turned tighter, and could outmaneuver any American fighter at any altitude. Japanese pilots knew it. American pilots knew it. The math was simple and brutal. A Zero could outturn a Wildcat in 14 seconds. 14 seconds to get on your tail, 14 seconds to line up guns, 14 seconds to kill you. By February, the Pacific Fleet had lost 43 Wildcats in 1-versus-1 dogfights with Zeros, 43 pilots who tried to turn with Zeros, 43 funerals. The pattern never changed. American pilot sees Zero, American pilot turns to engage. Zero outturns him, Zero shoots him down. Command kept sending the same orders: avoid turning engagements, run if possible. But running meant abandoning other pilots. Running meant letting Zeros strafe your buddies while you fled. Thach commanded Fighting Squadron 3. 4 pilots, 4 Wildcats, 4 men who trusted him to keep them alive. But he had no answer for the Zero's turn radius, no answer for its climb rate, no answer except watch good men die. 3 days earlier, Thach had sat in his quarters at Naval Air Station San Diego, staring at a pack of matches. His wife had sent them in a care package, 20 wooden matches in a thin cardboard box. He'd been thinking about the Zero problem for weeks. How do you beat an enemy who can outturn you? How do you survive when the enemy is faster, more agile, and flown by pilots with 2 years of combat experience? Thach picked up 2 matches, held them parallel. Then he moved them in opposite directions, weaving them past each other. The matches crossed again, never separated, always supporting each other. And something clicked in his brain. What if 2 Wildcats didn't fight independently? What if they flew as a pair, weaving back and forth? If a Zero got on one Wildcat's tail, that Wildcat would turn toward his wingman. The wingman would turn toward him. They'd cross paths, and the Zero chasing the first Wildcat would fly directly into the second Wildcat's guns. It was insane. It violated every fighter doctrine in the United States Navy manual. Fighters fought alone. Pairs stayed together for navigation, but when combat started, you split up and fought 1 versus 1. That was how air combat worked. That was how every pilot had been trained since 1918. But Thach couldn't stop seeing those matches weaving together, couldn't stop thinking about 43 dead pilots. He'd called his wingman, Lieutenant Edward O'Hare, into his quarters that night, showed him the matches, explained the weave. O'Hare stared at the matches for 30 seconds. Then he looked at Thach and asked one question: when do we test it? 4 days later, Thach was about to find out if his matchstick trick would save lives or get 4 pilots killed. The 6 Zeros were 1,200 yards out and closing fast. His hand moved to the radio. Time to try something that had never been done in combat. Time to find out if 2 matches could beat 6 Zeros. Thach's voice cracked across the radio. "Weave on my mark." His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett, was 800 feet to his right. 2 more Wildcats, piloted by Ensigns Daniel Sheedy and Edgar Colson, flew another 1,000 feet beyond Bassett. 4 American fighters in a loose line. 6 Zeros diving from 11,000 feet. Standard doctrine said, split up, turn independently, fight alone. But Thach keyed his radio and gave an order that had never been spoken in United States Navy combat. "Bassett, on me, weave pattern, execute." Bassett turned his Wildcat toward Thach. Thach turned toward Bassett. They flew directly at each other. The Zeros dropped to 8,000 feet. Japanese pilots probably thought the Americans were panicking, probably thought 2 Wildcats were about to collide. But Thach and Bassett didn't collide. At 400 yards, both pilots banked hard. Thach pulled left, Bassett pulled right. They crossed paths with 200 feet separation.
Then they kept turning, coming around to cross again, a figure-8 pattern, 2 aircraft weaving back and forth like those matches on Thach's desk. The lead Zero pilot picked Bassett, committed to the tail chase, closed to 600 yards. Standard Zero tactic: get close, use superior maneuverability, and hammer the target with 20mm cannon fire. The Japanese pilot probably expected Bassett to try and turn with him, probably expected an easy kill. But Bassett didn't turn away from the Zero, he turned toward Thach. The Zero followed, lining up guns. 500 yards, 400 yards. The Zero pilot had Bassett centered in his gun sight 3 seconds from firing. Then Thach's Wildcat came screaming through the weave pattern from the opposite direction. The Zero pilot suddenly had a new problem. He was chasing Bassett, but Bassett was flying directly toward another Wildcat, and that Wildcat had guns pointed straight at him. Thach opened fire at 300 yards, 6.5 caliber machine guns, 70 rounds per second. The Zero pilot had one choice: break off the attack or fly into a wall of bullets. He broke off, pulled hard right, climbed. The other 5 Zeros scattered. For the first time in Pacific combat, Zeros were running from Wildcats.
Sheedy and Coulson had watched the weave work. Now they tried it. Sheedy turned toward Coulson. Coulson turned toward Sheedy. 2 more Wildcats weaving. Another Zero committed to Coulson's tail, got to 400 yards. Then Sheedy came through the weave, and the Zero pilot flinched, pulled up, disengaged. The dogfight lasted 6 minutes. 6 Japanese Zeros versus 4 American Wildcats. Standard outcome should have been 4 dead Americans. But when the Zeros finally climbed away and headed northwest, all 4 Wildcats were still flying. Thach checked his fuel, checked his wingmen. Nobody hit, nobody killed. The weave had worked. Thach landed at Ford Island 40 minutes later. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. From the realization that maybe, just maybe, American pilots didn't have to die every time they met Zeros. But Fighter Command wasn't convinced. Thach filed his combat report that afternoon, described the weave, explained how it worked, recommended immediate adoption across all fighter squadrons. The response came back 3 days later. Interesting tactic, needs further testing, not approved for widespread use. Thach stared at that response for a long time. 43 pilots dead in February, and Command wanted more testing. Meanwhile, the Japanese were planning something bigger. Something that would test the weave against odds no fighter pilot had ever faced. Because in 68 days, Thach would be flying over an island called Midway, and he'd be facing 50 Zeros with 8 Wildcats. Between February and June 1942, Thach trained Fighting Squadron 3 on the weave every single day. Morning flights, afternoon flights, night formations. When the moon was bright enough, his pilots flew the pattern until they could execute it blind. Turn toward your wingman, cross, turn back, cross again. Simple in theory, but brutal in practice at 300 miles per hour with Zeros shooting at you. The Navy still hadn't officially approved the tactic, but Thach didn't wait for approval. He taught it to every pilot who would listen, showed them the matches, drew diagrams on blackboards, explained the geometry. If a Zero commits to your tail, you turn into your wingman's guns. The Zero has to choose: follow you into your wingman's guns or break off. Either way, you survive. Some pilots understood immediately. Others thought Thach was crazy. One squadron commander told him the weave violated basic fighter doctrine. You can't fly toward another aircraft in combat. You'll collide. You'll panic. You'll get both pilots killed. But Thach kept teaching because pilots kept dying. By May, the Pacific Fleet had lost 91 Wildcats in combat with Zeros, 91 funerals, 91 letters to families, and Fighter Command still issued the same orders: avoid engagement when possible, run if outnumbered. The orders might as well have said, give up and die. Then, naval intelligence intercepted Japanese radio traffic. Codebreakers at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor decrypted the messages. The Japanese were planning a massive assault on Midway Island. 4 aircraft carriers, 270 aircraft, the largest carrier operation in Japanese naval history. The attack was scheduled for June 4, 1942. Admiral Chester Nimitz called every available carrier to Pearl Harbor. He had 3. Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. The Japanese had 4, plus 2 years of combat experience, plus Zeros that could outfly anything America had. The math was nightmare fuel. American carriers were outnumbered, American pilots were outmatched, and Midway Island had a runway that Japanese bombers would turn into rubble in the first 30 minutes. Fighting Squadron 3 got deployment orders on May 26th. Report to USS Yorktown, prepare for carrier operations. Thach read those orders and understood what they meant. His squadron would be flying combat air patrol over Yorktown when the Japanese attacked, protecting the carrier from bombers, fighting Zeros, maybe dying. He gathered his pilots that evening. 7 men, 7 Wildcats, 7 lives depending on a trick with matches that the Navy still hadn't officially approved. Thach showed them the matches one more time, explained the weave one more time. Then he told them the truth. The Japanese are bringing 50 Zeros to Midway, maybe more. We'll have 8 Wildcats, maybe fewer if Enterprise or Hornet lose fighters before the battle. The only way we survive is the weave. The only way we protect Yorktown is the weave. The only way we win is the weave. One pilot asked the obvious question. What if it doesn't work? What if we weave and the Zeros just shoot us anyway? Thach didn't have a good answer. He just showed them the matches again, showed them how 2 matches weaving could cover each other, could protect each other, could survive together when surviving alone was impossible. Yorktown sailed from Pearl Harbor on May 30th. 4 days to Midway. 4 days to prepare for a battle that would decide the Pacific War. 4 days to pray that a matchstick trick would work when 50 Zeros came screaming out of the sky. Because on June 4th, at 9:30 in the morning, Thach would look up and see something no American pilot had ever faced, a sky completely black with Japanese fighters. June 4th, 1942, 9:30 in the morning. Thach was at 14,000 feet above Yorktown when the first Japanese strike wave appeared. 18 Aichi dive bombers escorted by 12 Zeros. Not 50, not the massive formation intelligence had predicted. But 12 Zeros was still 3-to-1 odds against Thach's 4-plane section. The Zeros came in high, 15,000 feet. Standard Japanese doctrine: establish altitude advantage, dive on American fighters, use speed and maneuverability to dominate the fight. Thach counted the enemy aircraft, counted his own. 4 Wildcats, 12 Zeros. His hand keyed the radio. Weave pattern, execute on my mark. His wingman, Lieutenant Junior Grade Edward Bassett, was 600 feet to his right. 2 more Wildcats behind them. The Zeros dove. Thach watched them commit, watched them pick targets. 3 Zeros broke toward Thach, 4 went after Bassett. The others continued toward Yorktown. Thach gave the order, mark, execute. He turned hard toward Bassett. Bassett turned toward him. They crossed paths at 12,000 feet. The 3 Zeros chasing Thach suddenly had a problem. Their target was flying directly at another Wildcat, and that Wildcat's guns were pointing at them. The lead Zero pilot hesitated, just for 2 seconds. But 2 seconds at combat speed is 400 yards. Thach came through the weave and opened fire. 50 caliber rounds ripped through the Zero's engine cowling. The Zero rolled left, trailing black smoke, fell away.
Thach's first Zero kill. But the other 2 Zeros didn't break off. They'd seen the weave, understood the pattern, and they adapted. Instead of committing to Thach's tail, they split. One went high, one went low. They tried to attack from different angles, forced Thach to choose which threat to counter. Thach pulled into a climbing turn toward the high Zero. Bassett broke toward the low Zero. The weave pattern fractured for 6 seconds. Both Wildcats were fighting independently, exactly what Thach had tried to avoid. The high Zero got guns on Thach at 800 yards. 20mm cannon fire walked up Thach's left wing. 2 rounds punched through the wing root. One went through his cockpit canopy 3 inches from his head. Thach felt the shockwave, felt aluminum fragments hit his flight suit, kept turning. Bassett called over the radio, "I'm hit. Repeat, I'm hit." Thach looked left. Bassett's Wildcat was trailing white smoke, coolant leak, maybe worse. The low Zero was still on his tail, hammering him with machine gun fire. Thach made a choice. Abandoned his turn toward the high Zero, dove toward Bassett. The weave had broken, but the principle still worked. Get between your wingman and the threat. Thach came down on the low zero from 7 o'clock high. 600 yards, 500, 400. He opened fire. The Zero exploded. Pieces of wing and fuselage tumbled through the air. Bassett's Wildcat was shaking, losing altitude. He called over the radio. Engines were overheating. I'm heading back to Yorktown. Thach told him go, told the other 2 Wildcats to escort him. That left Thach alone at 11,000 feet with 10 Zeros still in the sky. The weave worked with a wingman. Without a wingman, Thach was just another Wildcat pilot trying not to die. He turned toward Yorktown, started descending. 3 Zeros saw him, turned to intercept. Thach looked around for friendly fighters, saw 4 Wildcats from another squadron 3 miles east, too far to help. The 3 Zeros were closing. Thach had no wingman, no weave, no options except run. But running meant leading Zeros toward Yorktown, leading them toward the carrier his squadron was supposed to protect. He keyed his radio, called for help, told the other Wildcats he was engaging 3 Zeros solo, told them if the weave worked, they'd see proof. If it didn't work, tell his wife he loved her. Thach turned his Wildcat toward 3 Zeros and prepared to test whether a matchstick trick could save one pilot's life. Thach was at 9,000 feet when the 3 Zeros reached firing range. He was alone. No wingman to weave with, no support. But he'd spent 4 months thinking about the weave, 4 months understanding the geometry. And he realized something. The weave didn't require 2 aircraft. It required 2 points in space. He turned hard right, then immediately reversed left. Sharp angular turns, not the smooth turning fight Zeros expected. The lead Zero committed to follow Thach's right turn, but Thach was already reversing left. The Zero pilot had to correct, had to pull harder, had to burn energy. Thach did it again. Right turn, left reversal. The Zero followed right. Thach went left. The Japanese pilot was always half a second behind, always correcting, always reacting, and every correction cost speed, cost energy, cost the altitude advantage. After 40 seconds of reversals, the Zero was co-altitude with Thach. Same speed, same energy state, no advantage. The Zero pilot broke off, climbed away. The other 2 Zeros followed him. Thach had just proven something critical. The weave principle worked even without a wingman. Sharp reversals, constant direction changes. Never let the enemy predict your next move. Make them react. Make them bleed energy. Make them quit. He landed on Yorktown 20 minutes later. Bassett was already aboard. His Wildcat had taken 4 hits, but the engine held together long enough to reach the carrier. The other pilots from Fighting Squadron 3 were debriefing in the ready room. They'd all seen Thach's solo fight, all watched him survive 3 Zeros alone. Word spread through the fighter squadrons that afternoon. Thach's weave works, even solo, even outnumbered. By evening, pilots from Enterprise and Hornet were asking Thach to explain the tactic. He showed them the matches, drew diagrams, demonstrated the reversals. Some pilots tested it that night. Pair flights over the carrier groups, practicing the weave, learning the timing. By June 5th, 18 Wildcat pilots could execute the pattern. By June 6th, 32 pilots. The weave was spreading through the fleet faster than any official doctrine ever had. Japanese pilots noticed. Radio intercepts from June 7th included references to new American tactics, American fighters flying in coordinated pairs, American fighters executing unpredictable maneuvers, American fighters that refused to die. One intercepted message from a Japanese fighter commander said, "American Wildcat pilots have changed their methods. Expect increased resistance." On June 10th, Fighting Squadron 3 flew combat air patrol over a convoy near Midway. 8 Wildcats, 14 Zeros attacked. Thach called the weave. All 4 pairs executed. The Zeros tried their standard tactics, tried to isolate individual Wildcats, tried to use superior maneuverability.
But every time a Zero committed to a Wildcat's tail, that Wildcat turned toward his wingman. Every time the Zeros tried to split a pair, Both Wildcats turned toward each other. The pattern held. After 12 minutes, the Zeros broke off. They damaged 2 Wildcats, but scored 0 kills. The Americans had shot down 3 Zeros, 3 confirmed kills, first time in Pacific combat that Wildcats had a positive kill ratio against Zeros in a major engagement. Fighter Command finally took notice. On June 15th, Commander John Thach received orders to report to Pearl Harbor. Report to Admiral Nimitz, prepare a formal briefing on the weave tactic. The Navy wanted to evaluate whether this matchstick trick should become official doctrine. Thach arrived at Pearl Harbor on June 18th, spent 2 days preparing the briefing, prepared diagrams, combat footage, pilot testimonials, kill ratios, survival statistics, everything command needed to see that the weave worked. But while Thach was preparing his briefing, Japanese intelligence was preparing something else. They'd analyzed the new American tactics, they'd studied the weave pattern, and they developed a counter-tactic, a way to break the weave, a way to kill both Wildcats at once. On June 21st, Thach would brief Admiral Nimitz on the weave. But on June 23rd, Fighting Squadron 3 would face 18 Zeros over Santa Cruz Island, and those Zeros would be using tactics specifically designed to destroy the Thach weave. June 23, 1942, 8:15 in the morning, Santa Cruz Island. Fighting Squadron 3 was escorting a convoy when radar picked up contacts. 18 bogies inbound from the northwest. Distance 12 miles. Thach counted his Wildcats, 8 aircraft, 4 pairs, standard weave formation. He'd briefed Nimitz 3 days earlier. Nimitz had authorized field testing of the weave across all Pacific fighter squadrons. Now Thach was about to discover that the Japanese had done their homework too. The Zeros came in at 16,000 feet, but they didn't dive immediately. They circled, waited. Thach watched them orbit at altitude for 90 seconds. Strange behavior. Zeros always attacked immediately, always used altitude advantage fast before Americans could climb. But these Zeros were waiting for something. Then Thach understood. The Zeros were coordinating. 6 Zeros broke left, 6 broke right, 6 stayed high. 3 groups, 3 angles of attack. They'd seen the weave. They knew 2 Wildcats could protect each other from one direction, but 3 directions simultaneously. That was different. The attack came at 8:17, 6 Zeros from high. 6 came in from the left flank, 6 from the right. Thach called the weave, but his pilots hesitated. Which threat do you counter when threats are coming from 3 directions? Lieutenant Bassett turned into the high Zeros, but that exposed his right flank to the right side group. Ensign Sheedy turned to cover Bassett's right, but that broke the weave pattern with his own wingman. Suddenly, all 4 pairs were fragmented, 8 Wildcats fighting independently. Exactly what the Japanese wanted. Thach saw it happening, saw the weave collapsing. He keyed his radio. Reform pairs, lock onto your wingman, execute standard weave, ignore the other groups. His pilots heard him. Bassett turned hard toward his wingman, found him, locked in. They executed the weave even with Zeros attacking from multiple directions. The high Zeros dove. Bassett turned toward his wingman. The Zeros followed, flew into his wingman's guns. 2 Zeros exploded. The others pulled up. The left group tried next, came in at 14,000 feet. Thach and his wingman executed the weave. 1 Zero committed, flew through the crossing pattern, took .5 caliber rounds through the cockpit, fell away smoking. The right group attacked Sheedy's pair. Same result. Weave held. Zero crashed. After 8 minutes, the Japanese had lost 5 Zeros. The Americans had lost 0 Wildcats. The coordinated 3-direction attack had failed. The Zeros climbed away. But Thach knew something critical had just happened. The Japanese had adapted. They'd studied the weave. They'd developed a counter-tactic. The fact that the counter-tactics failed didn't matter. What mattered was Japanese command was taking the weave seriously.
taking it seriously enough to train pilots specifically to defeat it. That evening, Thach filed a combat report, described the three-direction attack, described how the weave held even under coordinated assault, recommended immediate widespread adoption. No more testing, no more evaluation. The weave worked against standard tactics. It worked against adapted tactics. It worked. Period. The report reached Admiral Nimitz on June 25th. Nimitz forwarded it to Admiral King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet. King read it, read the kill ratios, read the survival statistics. 0 American losses, 5 Japanese losses. 8 Wildcats versus 18 Zeros.
Admiral Halsey read that combat report and immediately issued orders. Every fighter pilot in the South Pacific would learn the Thach weave within 2 weeks. No exceptions. Training programs started on July 10th. Thach flew to Guadalcanal, spent 3 weeks teaching the weave to every squadron on the island. Morning briefings, afternoon flight training, evening debriefs. He showed pilots the matches, drew the diagrams, flew demonstration patterns. Some pilots learned in 2 days, others needed a week, but every pilot learned. By August 1st, 96 Wildcat pilots could execute the weave. By September 1st, 214 pilots. The tactic spread from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from carriers to land bases, from Wildcats to other aircraft types. P-38 Lightning squadrons started using it, P-40 Warhawk squadrons. Even some bomber formations adapted the crossing pattern for defensive purposes. The results were immediate and dramatic. In June 1942, before the weave became doctrine, American fighters had a kill-to-loss ratio of 0.4 to 1 against Zeros. For every 10 American fighters lost, Americans shot down 4 Zeros. By October 1942, after widespread weave adoption, the ratio was 2.1 to 1. Americans were shooting down 2 Zeros for every Wildcat lost. Japanese pilots hated it. Radio intercepts from September showed Japanese squadron commanders warning pilots about the American crossing pattern. Do not commit to tail chase. Do not follow American fighters into their wingman's guns. Disengage if Americans execute coordination tactics. But disengaging meant losing the fight, meant letting American fighters protect their bombers, meant giving up air superiority. The Zero was still faster and more maneuverable than the Wildcat, but speed and maneuverability meant nothing if you couldn't get guns on target, and the weave made it almost impossible to get guns on target. By January 1943, the weave was standard doctrine across all United States fighter squadrons. Army Air Force adopted it. Marine Corps adopted it. British Royal Navy pilots started learning it for their carriers. The tactic that started with 2 matches on a desk in San Diego had become the foundation of Allied fighter doctrine. Thach received the Navy Cross in February 1943. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the development of fighter tactics that have saved numerous American lives and contributed significantly to the success of United States naval aviation operations." But Thach didn't care about medals. He cared about numbers. In the 6 months before the weave, the Pacific Fleet lost 137 Wildcats in combat with Zeros. In the 6 months after the weave became doctrine, the fleet lost 41 Wildcats. 96 pilots who came home because 2 matches could cross paths. Fighter Command assigned Thach to training duty in March 1943, pulled him from combat operations, sent him back to San Diego to teach the weave to new pilots. He hated it, hated being away from the fight, but Command told him he was more valuable as an instructor than as a combat pilot, more valuable teaching the trick than using it.
Thach trained pilots for 18 months, taught the weave to over 800 naval aviators. Every one of those pilots took the tactic to combat. Every one of them survived situations they shouldn't have survived, and every one of them told other pilots about the commander who saved their lives with matchsticks. The war ended in August 1945. Thach was 40 years old. He'd flown 73 combat missions, scored 6 confirmed kills, received the Navy Cross, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and 3 Air Medals. But none of that compared to the number that mattered. Over 2,000 American pilots survived the war because they knew how to weave. After the war ended, Thach faced a choice: stay in the Navy or return to civilian life. His wife wanted him home. His children barely knew him. He'd been gone for 4 years. But staying in the Navy meant continuing to teach, continuing to save lives. What would a man who saved 2,000 pilots with matchsticks do when the shooting stopped? John Thach stayed in the Navy. He couldn't walk away from teaching, couldn't walk away from pilots who needed to survive. He spent the next 27 years training fighter pilots, developing tactics, saving lives without firing a shot. The Navy promoted him to commander in 1946, captain in 1952, rear admiral in 1960. He commanded carrier groups during the Korean War, never flew combat again, but his pilots did, and every one of them knew the weave. Korean warfighter pilots called it the Thach weave, officially. No other tactic in military history carried a pilot's name while he was still alive. During Vietnam, the weave evolved. F-4 Phantom pilots adapted it for supersonic speeds, called it Fluid 4 formation. Same principle, same crossing pattern, different speeds. American pilots used it against North Vietnamese MiGs. The MiG-17 could outturn the F-4 just like the Zero outturned the Wildcat, but the weave worked at 600 miles per hour the same way it worked at 300 miles per hour. Thach retired from the Navy in 1973, 4-star admiral, 40 years of service. He moved back to San Diego, lived quietly, didn't talk much about the war. Didn't talk about Midway or Guadalcanal or the 2,000 pilots. When reporters asked about the weave, he always said the same thing. It wasn't genius, it was desperation. I just wanted my boys to come home. Fighter pilots never forgot him. Every year, on February 10th, the anniversary of the first weave combat test, naval aviators from around the country would call Thach, thank him, tell him stories about how the weave saved their lives or their wingman's life. Thach listened to every story, remembered every name. The Navy named a building after him in 1981, Thach Hall at Naval Air Station Pensacola, a fighter pilot training facility. Every naval aviator who earns their wings walks past a bronze plaque with Thach's face and 3 words: innovate, adapt, survive. Thach died on April 15, 2001, 86 years old. His funeral at Arlington National Cemetery drew over 300 naval aviators. Many were in their 70s and 80s, men who'd flown Wildcats in 1943, men who'd flown Phantoms in 1967, men who'd flown Hornets in 1991. All of them alive because one commander thought about matchsticks. Today, the Thach weave is still taught at every fighter pilot school in the United States military, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Modern versions adapted for stealth fighters and beyond visual range combat. But the principle never changed. 2 aircraft protecting each other, turning towards each other, crossing paths, surviving together. The National Naval Aviation Museum in Pensacola has Thach's original pack of matches preserved in a glass case next to a model F-4F Wildcat. The label says, Lieutenant Commander John Thach used these matches to develop the tactical innovation that saved over 2,000 American pilots during World War II. School groups walk past that case every day. Most don't stop, but fighter pilots always stop. They look at those matches. They understand.